Alright, hello. My name is LYNX, and today we're going to talk about how to do SDxHG gunman plastic surgery, basically operating on plastic model kits. I am not a licensed surgeon, but I will be teaching you how to make surgical procedures. What is an SDxHG? Well, it's simply an SD plus an HG. No, it's not that. An SDxHG is like a kit bash of basically taking the parts from an HG, chopping the limbs down, and creating kind of this hybrid. I always describe it as toddler proportions. So it gives it kind of more a meaner, aggressive look to it. Gives you better proportions, length, articulation to your SDs. They're usually kind of stubby and really lacking a lot of detail. In Japan, they have a whole entire category that they'll have contests with just a whole section of these things. So over there, it's really popular. It's just really hard to also find on the internet because it's all in kanji and really hard to find what in the world they're called. Oh, okay. So why would you build an SDxHG? Well, like I described, better proportions, aggressive look, better articulation, and my favorite, it's kind of a fun problem-solving thing. It's very much you take a kit and you have to figure out every single one of them is different, what you cut, what you don't cut on it. So you decide you want to build it. How do you do it? Step one, you gotta get supplies. So you obviously have to start with an SD kit. Usually you're going to use the head, sometimes the body and shoulders, sometimes the accessories. It all depends on every single kit is completely different. You're obviously going to need an HG kit, a knife, some files, or in my case, like a whole bucket of files, glue, Gorilla Glue always works, a saw, tape, epoxy putty for the cleanup, claw plate, Band-Aids, because you will cut yourself, and possibly an emergency ride to the hospital when you cut yourself too deep in that finger. Alright, step two, under the knife. So, you've decided that you want to build one, you have the supplies ready. What kit do you choose? It's kind of a tricky question to ask. It really comes down to what kit do you like, and what kit are you willing to spend the next couple months maybe chopping apart and building and working on. Now, that being said, there are some that are harder than others. If you pick a kit that's from the old school SDG generation, their heads are actually really squished. And it's kind of hard to get it to look proper when you stick it on an HD body. It almost looks a little too small and stuff. So it's always good to kind of just gauge what is the size comparison of the SD kit that you're building and the HD kit. If you're building like, say, a Suzabi or something, that's a really big kit in the actual HG form. And when you get the SD form, the head might actually look too small for it, which is kind of annoying. And somehow that moved. There we go. So, beginner's guide tips to which ones you pick. First off, does it exist in both SD and HD form? That one will save you a ton of time. Especially if you go down the road and you're like, I want to build this kit, and then it has no SD form, guess what? You have to build a head for it. And it's a pain in the butt. You want to probably pick one with simple limbs. Things like the unicorn, the banshee, and the Sananju, they have very complex parts to their legs. It makes it really difficult to try to cut around all of those details without looking like you're cutting straight into the detail to gluing it back together. Slim suits are also tough. I see a lot of my friends, beginners, trying to start with like an Exia. It's a great kit, but the skinny the limbs, when you make it small and kind of toddler sized, they tend to look like little tiny sticks sitting on the top of a really top-heavy body with a big torso and big head. So it's a bit difficult. I've seen it done well, but it's harder than other kits are to do. That being said, the reverse is true with kits that have a lot of boosters or accessories attached to their legs, thicker legs. They tend to look really great in SDxHG form. It tends to you can make them have longer limbs, but it doesn't feel like they're super long, skinny chicken leg limbs because they have so many details on the sides of them. Another thing to think about is your accessories. You will have to try to figure out how to cut down or use your accessories. So if he's got a big giant shield in the HG form and the SD form has a little tiny squatty shield, you're going to have to figure out how to take the HG one and cut it down to size. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Side note, did you know Bandai never made an SCGM? And no, he does not count. Ask me how I know. My first SDxHG was a GM. And then I realized that they never sold a kit for that. I had to take a gun tank head and modify it. It's a pain in the butt and I do not recommend it. Planning the procedure. Have a goal what your proportions are that you want. Most of the time I will take it, I'll lay out the parts, and then mock it up on Photoshop. It doesn't have to be the prettiest thing. You can just seriously just cut and chop the photo and move it up. And then just kind of get a gauge of idea of what you want. Proportions are kind of a thing that's it's like art, it's subjective. Everyone likes different proportions, so there's no right or wrong. So it's always fun to play around in Photoshop where you can make these changes all day left and right, and then finally narrow down, all right, I do want it to be about this size. That does seem to fit this character better. Converge kits, or figures, not kits. Converge figures are really great references. They're basically in SDxHG form in a little tiny thing that you can buy at the super cheap and sit on your desk, right there for a reference. If you don't want to buy one, you can also Google images of it. But they have a really great understanding of proportions. And just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about proportions-wise, the head of the SD is about 3.5 or 3.25 tall of the whole entire body. The legs have no shins to them. The thighs are pretty much connected straight to the knee on most kits. The arms, although Converge kits do them a little bit longer, they are shorter than an HG kit. If you put an HG kit's arms on one that you chop the limbs off, his arms will be way down to his calf. And then the other thing that a lot of people miss is the torso. The torso is actually shortened right around the stomach area of an SDxHG. A lot of people forget that, and they shorten the limbs and then just stick it on an HG body and waist and call it a day, and it looks really weird why it has a really long body and really short limbs. So I basically just went over all of that. The last thing that you also want to remember is the neck. A lot of people forget about the neck. So when you put an SD kit head on an HG body and you sit it just straight down on where the HG neck piece is, it's going to look like it has no neck and its head is just right up against the shoulders. So a lot of times you want to angle it upward and actually build a neck piece or neck joint to stick the head kind of on, and I usually tilt it forward so its chin covers over where you built that neck piece. Alright, step 4. We're finally to the point where you're going to make the first cut here. So, for legs, I kind of briefly went over a little bit, but most of the time, your legs, you're going to sit there and chop it straight off and cut out pretty much almost all of the shin, leaving right around the bottom part of the shin where the ankle joint is, because you'll need that to attach the leg, and right under the kneecap is usually my kind of go-to roll with them. The reason I do that is because a lot of kits, the shins are usually a very empty spot on them. But the knees and right around the ankle guards are very recognizable between kits. So they're kind of your key things that you look at and you go, that's a Wing Gundam, or that's a powered GM. It's super recognizable little pieces that you don't want to actually cut out. And so you always want to try to remove the empty dead spaces, which is usually the empty shin area. Thighs. Thighs will either, I always get this question a lot, thighs will either be really, really, really small and short, or you'll have to build your own custom scenario thing where it's literally the knee going straight into the hip joint. And you might go, that seems kind of weird, but when you put it next with a waist that has the front skirts on it, you're not really going to see the thigh area. You're just kind of going to see that there's a leg there. And if you have that prominent feature of the kneecap still in full tact, that will take your focus away from the fact that there's no thigh behind it. And then I also already mentioned this already, try to keep recognizable details. So anything that you look at that and you go, that is this Gundam kit. Try to keep that on there. Even if you have to slice it off, cut that shin down, and then glue it back onto the side. So, second part of the legs. I was just showing off another example. I was like, oh, what was this like? So here's an example of one that I did for the, I took the Power GM cardigan from Build Fighters and tried to build an SDxHG out of it. So I had kept this bottom piece of the ankle. That was a very recognizable piece to me for being a Power GM, and then also the knee pieces are very recognizable to a Power GM. So I decided to make the executive decision to cut right underneath that knee and right above that piece and fit it right up there, and that's all the shin I basically have now. And then I kept these in full tact on the sides to help build it up. The arms. So for the arms, basically, it's fairly simple. You just shorten the forearm. Most kits have a basic square arm that you can just kind of cut straight down the middle, sand both sides a little bit, and glue it back together, and voila, you're pretty much done. The tricky part is when it comes to the bicep. You're going to either have to shorten the bicep really small, or in the case of when I was doing the Austrade, use an actual SD bicep that is really small. And if you do use an SD bicep or shorten it, you may also have to customize the joint of which it connects to the shoulder. It's an unfortunate problem-solving part that you have to figure out trying to combine an SD. Might have a 3.5 millimeter peg, but the HG actually has a ball joint there. And now you have to figure out how to connect the two. Why does that keep moving? All right, torso. I kind of briefly mentioned it. You basically take the lower ab part and file it or cut it way down. Pretty much almost all gone. And that gives you a pretty good proportion size while still keeping the details of your upper body of the torso that you're trying to get from the HG. Other things that you may have to do. Some kits, you cut the legs down, you stick them on that waist piece, and it feels like the leg is still either too long, or it feels like it's really far away from that body that you now cut. Like your pelvis is really huge. So you may have to cut in and actually make your own hip joint. There's two methods that I kind of try to do, which is I first start with, can I cut out the area where the hip joint is and move it up? And if sometimes that fails, like in the case of this one with just two ball joints stuck to a piece of plastic, so there's no way I could do that, you might actually have to custom build your own hip joint, which is always really fun. Because then the day of the contest, it breaks on you. But anyways, yeah, that's kind of another way to just get, if you want to keep more detail on your leg, but you don't want to sacrifice that weirdness of it looking too tall, you may want to look at moving that hip section just up a little bit. These are small little things that add up over time that you never notice when you're looking at surface level. And remember, a good rule of thumb, you can always continue to cut more, but it's really hard to put that thing back that you already cut. So I always try to start with just cutting a little bit, looking at it, put it down, stand away, look at take a picture of it and see what the proportions look like, and then I can go back to it and cut or shave a little bit more and more and more until I'm finally happy with it. That's also why the Photoshop thing works too. You can also do the Photoshop thing mid-process to see, hey, I do like it here, but what if I did go a little bit farther? Would it work? Step 5, post-op. So you made your cuts. Your patient is finally the way that you want it to. All of the plastic surgery is done. What do you do now that you have these spare limbs just randomly glued together? You're going to have to do filling of gaps. When you take a leg that has a giant knee with a cross-section, really tall cross-section, and you try to combine it with the ankle that has a very small cross-section, you're always going to have a difference in widths. So you're going to have to either figure out a way that you can taper that together using claw plate, or fill that gap area in with epoxy putty or millicut or your favorite choice. That's one of the things that a lot of people always forget about, is you have to try to transition the width. Everyone looks at it front ways, but you always forget sideways that the widths are way off. Another way that can help if, say, there is just a huge step between the two widths, is kit bash and use greebles from other things. The back plates of HG hands work really well for just added detailing that you can stick on somewhere. It looks like a flat, mechanical flap, and cover up that really weird kind of stepping joint and help make it flow kind of together. So with that said, any questions? I don't know what time it is. We may or may not have a demo.
119.
Huh?
119.
119?
You're only 20 minutes in.
How many minutes do I have?
40.
Oh, boy. All right, I guess we have 20 minutes to do a demo here. So demo time. I'm not sure how to switch the camera over. Freddie will probably be over here in 5 seconds. All right, so I guess technical difficulties are done. We're back. We are going to attempt to fumble through making an SDxHG live in 15 minutes. I don't have a watch. So, like I said, basically we're going to start with an SD kit. I picked this Musha Gundam because it's the closest to a RX-78 I could find at the time, and an RX-78. So first step, we're going to plop off the head of the SD Gundam and basically take all the rest of this and stick it aside. Then we're going to take our world's smallest cutting mat and start looking at what proportions that we want to take off of this. So I always start, as you saw with my presentation, the legs. That seems to be the best thing to kind of get your proportions all figured out. If you can figure out the legs, then the arms are pretty simple, and the body is pretty simple, and from there on you can kind of figure out the rest of it. So we're going to take one of these legs off and remove the accessories as well, just so we can get a clear view about proportions. Is that upside down? It is upside down for you guys. Interesting. Okay. Nah, whatever.
I could adjust that real quick. Flip. Alright, can you see the flip?
Flip vertically.
There we go.
Hey! I'm not building in Australia anymore. Alright, so first step, I always bend the leg down. That's like the easiest way you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like without a thigh. And that's kind of where we're standing here with, as far as proportions wise. Now, it's kind of okay, but if we take our head with the helmet that keeps falling off because I don't know who designed this kit, but its helmet never stays on. And we just kind of prop it up. It still looks a little bit kind of real long and chicken-like. So, to remedy that, we're going to take and cut our shin. Now, the camera is there. Okay, so an RX-78 shin is actually really handy for doing one of your first ones because there's very little in the middle of there, and there's very little width taper between where we're going to make the cut and where we're going to probably join it down at the bottom. They kind of go in and then back out. So when we finally cut these two pieces together and mash it up, there'll be very little gap to actually fill in width-wise. So they're really handy ones to start with. So, first I'm probably going to take a marker or a pen and lay out where I want to make the cuts. You guys are not going to see that, so I'm going to switch to Sharpie. Now when it comes to the thigh area, this kind of actually comes all the way down to here. I'm thinking that we can kind of get rid of that point, especially because it doesn't really match a lot of the squareness of the kit itself. So if we were to kind of just cut straight across here, it would get rid of that weird kind of visual language of the point there and make it more into a square that would match the rest of our kit here. So that's going to be my first cut right there, is just right under that kneecap. And since real estate is very limited with this tiny cutting mat, I'm going to move everything out of the way. We're going to take the world's straightest hobby blade. If you don't notice, I always seem to use this hobby blade and it is completely bent, but it works. And you just want to start gently at first to kind of get a groove of where you're going to go, and then just let the blade guide you. And make sure you don't slip, and know where your first aid kit is at all times. I'm just checking that I'm cutting kind of straight on all sides. I'm actually not. This is kind of going off on this side, but we'll fix that in post with my massive file of I didn't ask, you're going to be straight file. There we go. First cut done. One thing you also want to remember about SDxHGs, you're taking the two cheapest kits in the Gunpla series. So if you mess up, don't worry, you can buy another one. They're cheap. So now I'm looking at where my cut was. It's a bit kind of crooked, probably me. So we're gonna take this and you're gonna file it straight. File it straight here. And make a mess all over this presentation table for the next person. That seems close enough for the demo. So, next step, we're going to see this way. How short we want to make it. So I'm going to use the camera actually to my advantage here and kind of gauge right about where I want to have a little bit of that ankle section shin left over. I'm thinking about there looks good. Yeah, about there looks good. So I'm going to visually memorize that while I grab my marker and make a line where I'm going to cut. And we're in luck with this kit. The joint is actually going to be self-contained below our cut line. So we're not going to be cutting through any ankle joints today, which is going to be really nice. It's always a pain in the butt. Sometimes, if you're looking at where your line's going to cross-section, if your ankle joint is inside there, you probably want to disassemble it, pull your ankle joint out, reassemble just the leg piece and cut, make your cut, and then hollow that inside out and stick your ankle joint back in and maybe like glue it or something. This is one of those times, if I was more prepared, I would just pull out a piece from underneath and say, movie magic, we have it done. But I was up till 1 o'clock last night and did not get this done. For the sake of time, I'm just twisting that piece off because we're going to file it anyways. We got lucky and we cut right above the peg joint where that connects. Sometimes you will cut these apart and you cut right through the peg joint, and you're gonna have to basically glue it back together. All right, we got our cut done. So now we're gonna line it up. I usually try to keep the front of your ankle piece that's now your new really tiny shin. You're not gonna see that on camera, but lined up with the knee piece, flush. And then you usually wanna fill the back part with putty. That just seems to be a good rule of thumb so you don't have a weird step in the front of your leg. So we're gonna call that good just for the sake of demos and glue this bad boy together. Both the orange and green will work. The green's just thinner. All right. So there we have our tiny little short leg. So now we're going to take it, prop it up next to our kit, probably put the ankle back on. Yep. There we go. Nope. Yes. Maybe.
Okay.
See real quick.
Alright, you're good.
We're back. So now, if we look at that, our leg is much more to the proportions that we're looking for. Now, of course, the body and everything else looks kind of funky at this point, but the leg definitely looks a lot better. I would probably also want to take the hips and raise them up, because now it kind of looks like the leg is just dangling way down at the bottom of your pelvis. So I would probably, with this, move the hips up. I do not have the time to do that. That is the longest process part. The next thing that we probably can do is maybe file the body down and see if we can get that to a good proportion size here. So those are the keen eyes of you out there. You probably recognize that this isn't actually an HG, it's the first grade. This is the first time I've actually looked at them, and they have a totally different stomach section. So let's see here. Oh, it is entry grade. Yeah, you're right. Not first grade. Okay. So here comes the problem-solving part. We're going to need this ball joint to be able to connect still back into our pelvis. So we're going to probably want to figure out a way to keep that, but also shorten this up. So I am not 100% sure here, but we'll figure it out together. So this part, the blue part, does stick down all the way down to where the stomach is. So we will have to actually shave off a lot of the cockpit joint door area. So I'll take a file to that. And just for the sake of the demo, I'm going to just forego that middle piece and kind of place it right about where it would be. So now we have a shortened body and legs. Now looking at it, the legs do still seem a little bit tall. I don't have anywhere to take out of the shin area. So in this case, if I were to continue working on it myself, I would actually want to take this side detail bit that's very recognizable of the RX-78, chop it off, and keep it on the side, and then actually sand down the top of the calf downward, and probably the top of the kneecap a bit downward to shorten it, so I can bring this up in a little bit more into the hip area, and then take these details that I've cut off and then glue them back on lower to keep that kind of detail. Because right now it still looks a little bit, just a little too long and weird that the knee is so tall compared to everything else. So just by shaving off just a little bit and bringing that just up there, I feel like would work really well for the proportions. So anyways, that's about all I had prepped for the demo today. I'm not going to go through the whole process because sometimes that takes a good weeks or months to get everything all going and puttied and cleaned up and stuff like that. With an RX-78, it's a bit simpler, but some of the other ones, there's so many pieces and parts to deal with. So with that, any questions? All right, thank you for your time. Yeah.